Welcome to Data Innovation Summit 2021, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here. My name is Errol Koolmeister, and I'm the creator of the AI framework, which might sound a bit corny to some of you, but it's extremely explanatory to what I do. Today I'm going to be talking about creating a high-performance AI team. So this is not a super technical talk, but rather leveraging some of the experience I've learned the last 5 years, where I've hired almost 350 data scientists, machine learning engineers, software developers, business analysts, etc., and built very large-scale teams in large organizations globally. This clicker doesn't seem to work. Sorry for that. While that gets fixed, I can continue talking because that's what I like doing. High performance AI team. So what I do within the AI framework these days is to support the AI-driven transformation. And I have a very pretty slide on that coming up very soon. But the AI-driven transformation is really about organizing around value. Many of you have probably heard about digital transformations. Well, I'm taking it for granted. But AI-driven transformation is organizing around AI and data. So it's really about recipes and blueprints for successful AI implementations in companies. So let's start with talking about the why. So maybe you can change to the next slide. Yes, and the next one as well. Because as many of you know, you're here at Data Innovation Summit. AI today is not a competitive edge. And if you think it is, then I'm here to prove you wrong. AI is a hygiene factor. Those companies that doesn't keep up with the AI-driven transformation, that are going to become AI-first type of companies, they will fall short. Basically, I'll go through in this presentation that the problem isn't the change. The clicker still doesn't work. Maybe you can change the slide for me. Tech support, right? The first physical conference and it doesn't work. I miss online. The problem isn't change itself. The problem is adopting to change, because change is going to happen. And if you're into mathematics, the only constant is change in this formula. So we need a way of organizing around it. And I think the first way of looking at these things, I'm sorry for a shitty presentation, but this clicker doesn't work. The first thing you should always ask yourself when you're talking about AI, should you even build an AI product? Because the problem doesn't start with saying this is AI. The problem is identifying what it is you're going to do. And that's why you need to build a smart team around it. A smart team that focuses on value, that is strong enough to say, no, we're not going to do AI. We are going to do a rule-based product. No, we don't have to utilize AI for this, because time to value is more important. So then let's jump in to the characteristics. It works. Or I have a very good faker over there on the tech support. The first thing is creating the characteristics of a high-performance team. And I like stealing with pride. So this is stolen from the research that Google actually published. Creating a team is about creating a sense of purpose, having open and clear communication, trust and mutual respect, a shared leadership, and also having effective working procedures where you build on differences, you're flexible in adaptability, and then focus on continuous learning. Creating a team like that is not just enable of creating great technical products, but you're able to identify the right problem to work on. Identifying the right problem to work on is more important than having great technical skills. I think the common denominator in my career when I've hired people is that in the beginning I went all for credentials, all for education, all what you have done in the past. But sometimes I sat down at a team or a meeting or an interview and I had that pain in my stomach. You know, everything looks good. Oh, you went to Harvard. Oh, nice. Oh, MIT. Oh, I must hire you, right? Because it says so. But then you had this feeling in your stomach that this isn't right. And every single time I hired an individual with great credentials, but a bad feeling here, it went to hell. But then I had interviews with people that had no credentials, but they had this assertive attitude, right? You sit down at the table with them, and they're like, okay, what is it that you want to do? I don't know exactly how to do that, but I'm going to figure it out. And I'm not saying that's the entire solution of building a high-performance team, but it creates a great foundation for the next steps. Because building a team is just that. It's not the individuals. It's how they work together. And if you haven't seen the movie Moneyball, that gives you a very great explanation on how to build a team. Focus on the different strengths and how they complement each other. And I've been talking about this already, the right problem. So why is this important when you're building a team? This is another stolen thing for me. I don't even have to click it. Now it reads my mind. This is another stolen model for me. A 3 maximum model for enterprise innovation. And why is this important when you're building a team? Because most of the time you don't even know what problem you're trying to solve. And there are 3 ways of actually solving different business problems. One is doing business optimization. And that's like, if you have read the book Decision Machines, they talk about turning up the knob to maximum, getting the maximum volume out of these things. That's the first stage. And that's very easy to do because you can convince the business leaders that this is what's going to happen. Because it's familiar, you're improving, but you're going to have a maximum there. So this is a local optima that you can achieve. The other part is doing product market method innovation, which is a little bit, you're trying to get into a new market. And then the third part here is being business model innovation, and that's something completely new. And sometimes when I talk to teams, they don't even know what they're doing. Are we optimizing this current process or are we inventing something completely new? These are conflicting agendas. So getting the right problem that you're working on first is more important than getting the best team. Because if you're solving the problem and you know what problem you're solving, then it becomes much easier. Another way of looking at this is looking at what is your core operations that you're trying to solve. So the known problems, the known solutions, the regulatory things, which you need to do some innovation on. And then you have the adjacent ways, know the problem, but you don't know the solution. And then you have the one where you're doing the transformative of business. And we can take that one as well. That's when you don't know the actual problem. And this is the biggest problem I see out there when we're working with AI because it's so hyped. So it's still considered this is going to save our business, but you don't even know what problem you're solving. And then you organize for these things because it's important how you organize high-performance team as well. And some people might say, well, why don't we just do agile? Yeah, but agile isn't the solution to everything. Many companies organize and say SAFe is going to save us, agile product teams is going to save us, but that's not it. Because how you organize creates high-performance team as well, because it's about the solution that you build to the problem that you have. So the way you organize can be waterfall. And some people might not like that I say waterfall is a good delivery, but it's super good when you know what you're solving. When you know that you're building a bridge and you know what you need to do, well, why wouldn't you do waterfall? The problem is when you don't know exactly what you're building. When the constant change in the market is something you need to react to, well, then you should organize for agile. And then, if you don't even know what problem you're trying to solve, you need to organize as a lean startup. And lean startup might not be something that all of you have heard of, but it's a way, how do I pivot constantly so you don't work on the same problem for too long? Because it is important how you organize. And I think the way you work around this thing is equally important than that you work. Because if you're solving the wrong problem, then you'll never get the right solution. So the way you work should be, hopefully many of you have seen this, it's really about identifying what problems you're trying to solve. And when you're doing this hierarchy of needs, you don't move directly to the top layer. You don't start with the solutioning. You start with everything around it. So you move from the bottom of the pyramid all the way up. And this is one of the biggest problems as well. You might know what problem you're working on. You might organize for it, and you actually might have identified what you're doing. But then all of a sudden, your team starts focusing on the solution before building all the pipelines around it, without having all the tools to their disposal. Does that make them effective? No, it doesn't. So what we're talking about here is how can we enable best practice, agile way of working? So how do we create a clear clarity around the roles? How do we have a clear team responsibility? How do we make sure that if somebody is sick in our team, that the person next to them are able to step in during this period? How do we create a team with a monopoly approach with T-shaped individuals? And it's about creating a culture of backing each other up in that as well. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I really love that expression. But creating that culture comes also from a clarity of what you're doing and who is responsible for what, knowing that your teammates will back you up. And then the methods. Working on agile methodologies, there is a big fallacy in these things as well. Because the methods of agile isn't what creates delivery. Agile is about reacting to change, right? So the ceremonies are just there to support that, but they shouldn't be mandatory because each team needs to find their own rhythm as well. They're a baseline. And then the tooling. Should you use Microsoft Office for these type of things? Or should you use Slack? Should you use Jira? Well, you should use what makes sense and makes your team productive. But you shouldn't be foolish either if you're in a big enterprise. You need to find a good way of communicating because that's the key thing here. And you should automate as much as possible and support the team with those things. So infrastructure doing this is extremely important. And then of course the workspace. I don't know what the best way of organizing the workspace, but what I do know is that there are productivity gains if you can find a way of working where you can share knowledge between different teams and make your team as productive as possible. And it's not going to be everybody sitting in their own room. It's going to be something where they have the tools at their disposal and the infrastructure to do it. And then illustration of the what versus how principle, which is one of my favorites. In traditional organization, it's always been expert leaders saying, this is what you need to do. But what the research also shows from high performance teams is that if you shift your mindset as a leader, especially if you're an expert leader, and I know that's hard for many machine learning engineers or engineers in general or data scientists that knows the solutioning, that when you're building teams, you need to focus on the output rather on what it is exactly that they're building. Because that matters. What are your OKRs? What is the objective of the thing that they are building? And what are the key results you want to measure them on? And that's the dialogue you need to have as a leader. You should not just focusing on this is how you do it. And I've done this many, many times because I always thought I knew best until I was proven wrong several times. That you should do X, Y, and Z is a bad thing of having leadership. Rather, you should focus on these are the results I want to see. So leaders should stop saying what to do, and they should rather say where we need to go in order to be productive. And also, of course, how you organize around the MVPs type of speed up. So the traditional way of doing something is delivering in the end. But what I want to see are incremental improvements of the things that you're doing. I think this is relatively easy to grasp as a concept, but it's even more important when you're doing AI and data science. Because if you do the one on the top, you're spending too much time in the lab. And you won't see the results until they're actually out and published, which can take anywhere from a year to 2 years if you spend too much time just improving the accuracy of your different models. But if you let go of your ego a little bit as a data scientist, which I had to do several times, you can actually go to product much faster. So even though your first model might be rule-based, that might be better than what's in production today. And then the next iteration becomes better, and the next one becomes better, until in the end, you have solved the right problem. So delivering incrementally is a key part of organizing very effective teams. And I think even Google, as you can see, I'm quoting Google quite a lot, published in one of their blogs that you should start with doing some end-to-end infrastructure. The second step should be a very simple baseline model. It should be the simplest thing you can find. And then number 3, iterate consecutively on that and build the infrastructure around it. That creates incremental value delivery and isn't hypothetical, because I don't care how good your model is. If it's not into production and if it's not delivering value, I don't trust it. Up until that point, it's just hypothetical. And then, of course, if you're running multiple use cases, organizing in a way that makes it easy to scale is a good way as well. So when you're organizing the different roles in an AI use case, you can see here on your right side, my left side, that when you start doing things, you need to have a small team, more focused on the data science and engineering with support from the business side. But as you start proving value and organizing around that value, because that's what you should do, you shouldn't organize around structure, you should organize around value, you need to incrementally start scaling the team as well. And the people that started out with building the first engineering efforts, or that started out building the first models, they should not probably be the ones that takes it to scale, because these are different mindsets, in my opinion. These are different ways of actually applying technology. And what I've learned as well is that the big part in this is not the technology part, because that we can get out of the way relatively fast. The big part in all of this is the business adaptation and transformative integration. How are you going to get people to trust the result that you produced in a few months when they have done this for 30 years? So when you're rolling things out in a mature product, do you think your team should look exactly the same as it did when you created that product? Or is it a new skill set that you need to complement with or even replace some people in that team with? So teams will go through different phases. Even though they should be T-shaped, generalists in many and specialists in one, creating a T, they probably need specialists in communication, transformation, integration, stakeholder management as you progress in the maturity. So going back to the title of this talk, how to create highly effective AI teams, the definition of effective should be associated with the return on investment. So what are we able to get back from our investment? And the only way to do that is start making people use the results. Coming up to the end, so I thought it would be time to summarize a little bit. I speak relatively fast, I think, but what is most important here is when you organize, rather than having teams where people are trying to do everything, you need to start focusing on the high value outcomes, which is basically start getting things into production and then integrate and get people to use the result. It might be identified as high value outcomes, but it's not a real value until somebody acts on it. In traditional organizations, you have a siloed IT organization. It doesn't really work. It needs to be cross-functional teams delivering on business value instead. And just as you saw the data science team composition I showed you earlier, you can't work in silos. The majority of your time in a team needs to be spent on understanding what other teams are doing as well. So even though it's a cross-functional product team, you need to spend a lot of time on communicating with others. Waterfall approach. I said in the beginning that I like the waterfall approach when you know what execution looks like. But when you don't know, it needs to move to an agile iterative development when you're adopting to market changes. When you don't know the solution, then you shouldn't use waterfall. Data spread across multiple systems into an ecosystem. I'm not going to stand there and promote data mesh because I haven't seen it proven yet, but I like the concept. But what we need to have is more of an ecosystem where there's easier access to data, when people know how to use the data in a secure and compliant way. Take away all of these thresholds. And then going from many managers into many doers, where we take away many of the middle layers of execution and we push decision making down to the ones that are actually working on that problem. And then it's about value, it's not about structure. Because organizations should be built around the value creation process, not the other way around. And it should be a clear focus on deliverables. Start with proving the real value, adopt team to match delivery, and then the Moneyball approach. And once again, if you haven't seen it, see it. It's super cool. And then technology is the small part. Because we talk about highly effective AI teams in a sense that it's all about the data science and machine learning engineers, but it's not. They create the value, but they don't make people use it. So it's even more important that even if you have the worst data scientists you can find and they just make a small accuracy improvement, it's even more important to get that small accuracy improvement to be used by the business side and get them to trust the algorithms. It doesn't matter if you have the best data scientists in the world if all they do is sit around and do calculations all day. And nobody's actually executing on those good results. So to sum it all up, what we want to do is go from experience-based, leader-driven decision-making into data-driven decision-making at the front line, enabling the teams to take the decisions themselves and not somebody else. Make the teams accountable, and you'll see a tremendous amount of performance increase from that team. And now my time is up, and I would like to thank you so much for listening in.